Hola chicos, bueno, bienvenidos a la segunda semana de español nivel básico 2. Pues vamos a estar empezando con esta semana, vamos a hacer varias cosas, vamos a hacer este bosquejo, ¿no? Vamos a hablar del alfabeto, vamos a repasar el verbo ser, vamos a hablar de verbos regulares en el presente y verbos irregulares en yo y verbos irregulares en la raíz, right? This is what it is that you'll be required to do this week. So we're going to go over it in detail. I have an additional lecture online on this, but it may be similar slides or even the same slides because the slides take a really long time to make, so I tend to reuse them, so I apologize. But I will try to be brief and just kind of give some explanation and kind of give you some strategies to help you as we start this week. Okay. So one of the things that you'll be doing this week is you'll be going back over the alphabet. You'll be listening to a video on the abecedario, which is what we call the alphabet, or the ABCs, right? Abecedario. And you'll be going over the pronunciation of the alphabet. Again, you did this in Spanish 1. You completed a video where you listened to the alphabet. So this is not going to be totally untoward. Now, I know that I included letters that are no longer a part of the official Spanish language alphabet. In fact, actually, the only letter in the Spanish language alphabet officially that is different from what we have in the English language alphabet is the ñ. All the other letters can be made with other letters, and so they were determined to be superfluous. But I still include them only because I think they're useful for us as far as remembering the different sounds that Spanish makes. And so if you see them there, but you don't see them in other alphabet lists, this is why, right? They used to be included in the alphabet, and over time, the Real Academia Española has decided, right, that we don't need them. So that is part of why they're no longer in the alphabet, but I like to include them just to kind of give us an idea of how Spanish can look a little different than English. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Remember, right, that the way that the alphabet is spelled, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, E, Y, all of these kind of things, right? That those sounds, the way the words are pronounced, or the way the letters are pronounced, is a thing unto itself, right? And it's meant to incorporate the sound, but at the same time, right, they will have a more streamlined sound whenever they get into words. So that's something to kind of remember. One of the great things about Spanish is that it looks and sounds exactly the same, right? So, and the rules are very rigid for how pronunciation occurs. Unlike in English, right, where you can have multiple words that look the same but actually sound different, like polish and Polish, or wound and wound, or read and read, right? You won't ever get that in Spanish. If a word looks different, it is because it is different, right? It is a different word. So that is something kind of nice about Spanish that is very different than English. One of the things that is different about Spanish is that the vowel sounds are very pure. Unlike English, which has like 5 different ways to pronounce the letter A, for example, you will not have that in Spanish. So all of these A's will sound the same. La mamá gana la batalla is a. La rana traga la cala, a. No, Ana ama a la papa, a. No, they're all going to sound like A. The A sound is always going to make the sound, right? Regardless of where it is placed in the word. So, ese texto es a la letra. ¿No? Meche revela el pelele al nene. Es ¿no? Los reyes elegantes y mercantiles son de leyenda. ¿No? It's always going to be like rather, and it will never be E, because remember, E is a different letter in Spanish, right? So E is always going to be E. I can't see some of the ones at the top, so I'm going to start with 13. Hice una pizza picante con pimienta. Es I. Javier es de Piscis y Pilar es de Géminis, perdón. I should read the words before I look at them. I should look at the words before I read them. So es I, ¿no? Se siente la brisa en la cima de la colina. I, ¿no? So the letter that we think of as E is always going to be pronounced E, and the letter we think of as I is always going to be pronounced E, and they will never change. They will never be interchangeable. They will always be what they are. Similar to O will always be O. El oso es un ogro oloroso. Ojo por ojo. Yo reconozco a Rolo Orozco. It's O. It will never be anything other than O. Yeah? Or U, right? Bubú puso mucho tuco. Es U. Lulo ató un nudo muy duro. Hugo tragó las uvas por una. It's always going to be U. It's never going to be any other sound, right? So sounds are not interchangeable, and letters do not make sounds that they don't seem. They will always make the exact same sound, regardless of their position in the word. This is a little story to kind of help us with our pronunciation. So I'm going to read it. My recommendation would be that you try to read it, and then you also try to kind of get used to the kind of cadence and sounds of Spanish, right? So this is a children's story called Sara y Lucia. We're going to do 2 children's stories to kind of just listen to Spanish, right? If you don't understand what's being said, that's totally okay. The point is to just listen to more Spanish, okay? Hay 2 amigas quienes se llaman Sara y Lucia. Se conocen desde que son muy pequeñas y compartan siempre todo la una con la otra. Un día, Sara y Lucía salen de compras. Sara se comprueba una camiseta y le pide a su amiga Lucía su opinión. Lucía, sin dudarlo 2 veces, le dice que no le gusta cómo le queda y le aconseja de buscar otro modelo. Espera. Entonces, Sara se siente ofendida y marcha llorando de la tienda, dejando allí a su amiga. Lucía se queda muy triste y apenada por la reacción de su amiga. No entiende su enfado, ya que ella solo le dice a su amiga la verdad. Al llegar a casa, Sara le cuenta a su madre lo sucedido, y su madre le hace ver que su amiga solo habla sincera con ella y no tiene que molestarse por ello. Sara reflexiona y se da cuenta de que su madre tiene razón. Al día siguiente, corre a disculparse con Lucía, que la perdona de inmediato con una gran risa. Desde entonces, las 2 amigas entienden que la verdadera amistad se basa en la sinceridad. Y colorín colorado, este cuento se ha acabado. Y el que se enfade se quedará sentado, ¿no? So colorín colorado is a way that in Spanish we might say, and the moral of the story is, it's one way it's often used in children's tales. Here's another children's tale called Uga la Tortuga. And again, it's just to kind of help us listen to the cadence of Spanish. Can't see it there. Hold on. I'm going to have to pop it out of this screen so that I can read it. Just once it goes. Sorry about that, guys. Hold on. I'm going to just real quick. Okay. Caramba, todo me sale mal. Se lamenta constantemente Uga la tortuga. Y es que no es para menos. Siempre llega tarde, es la última en acabar sus tareas, casi nunca consigue premios a la rapidez y, para colmo, es una dormilona. Y esto tiene que cambiar. Se propone un buen día, harta de sus compañeros del bosque, le recriminan por su poco esfuerzo al realizar sus tareas. Y es que decide por no intentar nada, ni siquiera actividades tan sencillas como amontonar hojitas secas caídas de los árboles en otoño o quitar piedrecitas de camino de la charca donde nadan en verano. ¿Para qué preocuparme en hacer un trabajo que luego acaban haciendo mis compañeros? Mejor es dedicarme a jugar y a descansar. No es una gran idea, dijo una hormiguita. Lo que verdaderamente cuenta no es hacer el trabajo en un tiempo récord. Lo importante es acabarlo realizándolo lo mejor que sabes, pues siempre te quedas la recompensa de haberlo conseguido. No todos los trabajos necesitan de obreros rápidos. Hay labores que requieren tiempo y esfuerzo. Si no lo intentes, nunca vas a saber de lo que eres capaz. de hacer. Y siempre te vas a quedar con la duda de si lo puedes lograr alguna vez. Sorry, I'm recording this kind of late at night, so I'm a little tired. Por ello, es mejor intentarlo y no conseguirlo que probar y vivir con la duda. La constancia y la perseverancia son buenas aliadas para conseguir lo que nos proponemos. Por ello, te aconsejo que lo intentes, hasta que te puedes sorprender de lo que eres capaz. Caramba, hormiguita, me tocas las fibras. Lo que tú dices, lo necesito. Alguien me va a ayudar que comprende el valor del esfuerzo. Te prometo que lo voy a intentar. Pasan unos días y Uga la tortuga se esfuerza en sus quehaceres. Se siente feliz consigo misma desde cada día consigue lo poquito que se propone porque es consciente de que hace todo lo posible por lograrlo. Ya encontré mi felicidad. Lo que importa no es marcarse grandes imposibles metas, sino acabar todas las pequeñas tareas que contribuyen a lograr grandes fines. So one thing that you might do is go back and kind of try to read the story for yourself and see if maybe you could get a little bit further and see if maybe that might be, you could kind of try and pronounce, right? And see, how you would do with your pronunciation, kind of practice it a little bit that way if you have time. This is a little activity that I love to do in an in-person Spanish class, so we're going to kind of look at it a little bit together. This is something that is very interesting, right, about different languages, is that they have different types of sayings. So, sayings fall under the field of kind of pragmatics, right, or discourse, right, that is language in its social and spoken context, right? So there are lots of different types of sayings. One of my favorite sayings in Spanish is al perro flaco no le faltan pulgas, which literally means the skinny dog doesn't lack any fleas. But what it really means is that if someone is on a bad time or having a bad time, then other bad things are going to happen to them. And it's almost like the opposite of the saying, right? Money calls for money, right? So here are some sayings, and we're going to go through them to see how we do with what they mean, right? Now, if I was in with my class, what I would have them do is write down their guess for these sayings. So we're going to go through them, take out a pen and a piece of paper, see if you can guess what the sayings are. Okay. This saying says, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. So it might mean be positive even in bad situation, birds of a feather flock together, or don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Again, you're just going to kind of guess. The next saying is, caballo regalado no se le mira el diente. That could mean don't look a gift horse in the mouth, beggars can be choosers, or you snooze, you lose. Al mal tiempo, buena cara. This might mean full stomach, happy heart, be positive even in bad situation, or birds of a feather flock together. A falta de pan, buenas son tortas. So this might mean you snooze, you lose, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, or beggars can be choosers. Again, just guess. Another saying, right, which is barriga llena, corazón contento. And this might mean the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. If you take care of indecent people, they will take care of you in the end, or full stomach, happy heart. Camarón que se duerme, se lo lleva la corriente. This might mean you snooze, you lose. Where there's smoke, there's fire, or the early bird gets the worm. Cría cuervos y te sacarán los ojos. This might mean the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. If you take care of indecent people, they will take advantage of you in the end, or full stomach, happy heart. Cuando el río suena, agua lleva. So this might mean beggars can't be choosers, you snooze, you lose, or where there's smoke, there's fire. De tal palo, tal astilla. This might mean better late than never. If you want something, get it yourself, or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So now you're meant to look at the saying and see if you think that the translation of that saying is correct. right? So we'll start with 10. El que madruga coge agua clara means water is good for the soul. True or false? ¿Cierto o falso? El que quiera pescado que se moje el culo means the early bird gets the worm. Sorry. True or false? Hablando del rey de Roma means speak of the devil. ¿Cierto o falso? True or false? Más vale tarde que nunca means better late than never. ¿Cierto o falso? True or false? Más vale pájaro en mano que 100 volando means birds of a feather flock together. ¿Cierto o falso? True or false? Moro viejo nunca será buen cristiano means you can't teach an old dog new tricks. ¿Cierto o falso? True or false? No hay mal que por bien no venga means bad things happen to good people. ¿Cierto o falso? True or false? Ojos que no ven, corazón que no siente means out of sight, out of mind. True or false? ¿Cierto o falso? Quien fue a Sevilla perdió su silla means you snooze, you lose. And the last one, vivieron felices y comieron perdices y a mí no me dieron means, and they all lived happily ever after. Now let's see how we did. All right. So you might want to pause the video now and check your answers, but we're going to go through what each of these sayings kind of means. So this means, okay, here we go. I can read it a little better. This says, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. In other words, tell me who you hang out with and I'll tell you who you are. In English, we might say, birds of a feather flock together. Here, right, caballo regalado no se le mira el diente. To a horse given, don't look him in the teeth, or don't look a gift horse in the mouth, right? So some of these sayings are really favorite sayings. Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. The first saying was a favorite saying of my grandmother. She used to say that to me all the time, right? Because what she would mean, right? If you hang out with a group of bad people, then you are also somebody who's doing bad things, right? Or if you hang out with a group of, straight A students, right? You're probably going to also be getting straight A's. That was kind of her philosophy. Or, right, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, meaning, right, if somebody gives you something free, then you shouldn't give it back, right? Al mal tiempo buena cara literally means put a good face to bad times, or be positive even in bad situations, right? A falta de pan, buenas son tortas. That means, right, if there's no bread, cakes will do. Or in English, we say beggars can't be choosers, right? That is to say, if you don't have a lot, then you can't be too choosy about what it is that you get. Barriga llena, corazón contento, full stomach, happy heart. That one is pretty obvious. Camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente means the shrimp that falls asleep is swept away by the current, or you snooze, you lose, right? That's a fun saying in English. Okay, so some of the other sayings that we went through are cría cuervos y te sacarán los ojos, right? If you raise crows, they will peck your eyes out. In other words, if you take care of indecent people, they will take advantage of you. Or cuando el río suena, agua lleva, right? If the water makes noise, or if the river makes noise, it's carrying water. We might say, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? This is a super common saying, right? That people use to mean, right, that if you've heard gossip about something, even if maybe it's just gossip, then there's probably a grain of truth in it somewhere, right? That's kind of how people use the saying. Another saying is, de tal palo tal astilla, such as the stick, so is the chip, right? Or such as the branch, so is the chip, right? And we might say a chip off the old block, or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or like father, like son, right? Meaning those two people are very alike, right? El que madruga coge agua clara. He who rises early gets clear water, or in English, we might say the early bird gets the worm. El que quiera pescado que se moje el culo, right? He who wants fish should get his butt wet, or if you want something, get it yourself, right? Hablando del rey de Roma, speaking of the king of Rome, we might say, speak of the devil. We use this saying, right, whenever we are talking about someone and they come into the room, right? say you're gossiping about someone in a break room and they come in, right? You might be like, "Ooh, speak of the devil," right? Another saying, right? Más vale tarde que nunca, better late than never. Más vale pájaro en mano que cien volando. A bird in the hand is worth more than 100 flying. In English, we say a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, right? Meaning the real thing that we have in our hand is always better than the fantasy of something that we have not yet achieved, right? Moro viejo nunca será buen cristiano. An old Moor will never be a good Christian, or you can't teach an old dog new tricks. No hay mal que por bien no venga, right? There's no bad that from which something good doesn't come. Or in English, we might say every cloud has a silver lining. Ojos que no ven, corazón que no siente. In English, we might say out of sight, out of mind. Quien fue a Sevilla perdió su silla, or move your feet, lose your seat, right? And vivieron felices y comieron perdices y a mí no me dieron, and they lived happily ever after. I hope you did okay. Hopefully you did relatively okay. Now let's talk a little bit about verbs. This week, and we are going to be having what we're calling verb boot camp, right? Or that's what I called it on the syllabus anyway, right? It seems to me whether it's been a week or whether it's been 3 months, people struggle to remember the verb conjugation. I'm going to give you some suggestions for how to make this easier on yourself. And it's going to sound very, very simplistic, but it is 100% the best way to memorize these verb structures. And that is this. You want to make a series of note cards. I know it sounds very simple, but you want to make a series of note cards. And on the front, you want to write the verb in the infinitive. And on the back, you want to write the conjugation that you are trying to memorize. You want to hold a card up on the infinitive side, and in your brain, try to conjugate. So like if I had, for example, I'll show you what I mean, right? So let's say, I'm going to do a whiteboard. Okay. So let's say on my whiteboard, okay, I have the front of a card like this, and then I have the back of the card like this, okay? On the front, I want to write the infinitive. How about amar, to love, right? So this would be the front. Then on the back, I want to write the present conjugation of that verb. Yo amo. Tú amas. Él ama. Nosotros amamos. Vosotros amáis. Ellos aman. And then I want to practice looking just at this front part and trying to see if I can remember all of this, right? And just go through as many verbs as I can every week. So I'm washing dishes. I want to go through my verbs. I'm, waiting in line somewhere. I want to have my note cards in my pocket. I'm going to pull them out. I'm going to go through my verbs, because the thing is that this verb memorization here, 1, it involves memorizing. 2, like I just said. So 2, the other thing is 2, it is practice, right? You can't go from lifting no weights to trying to lift 100 pounds in the gym and think that you're going to do that. But it is the same with verb conjugation. Your brain needs practice reps to get to lift the 100 pounds, right? If you're going to get past this present tense verbs into other things, you got to do reps with your brain. And the only way to do that is through a system of memorization. And the best way is with note cards. If you are anywhere, you are waiting to go to class, you are waiting in a line, you are waiting at the grocery store, right? Any of those things, you just pull out your note cards and you start to test yourself on them until you get to the point where you remember how they're meant to look, okay? And your brain will start to make kind of new neurological connections, and then you will get to a point where you remember it, right? But you have to build into it. And it's really the only strategy. for doing this. There are lots of other things that you can do, but that is the best one. You just have to practice. You have to force your brain to make new nerve ending connections inside your mind and strengthen those nerve ending connections. The only way to do that is through memorization and practice. So that is my recommendation for learning these verb structures. Of course, it is up to you how you decide to do it. Okay. One of the first verbs that we learned is ser, which means to be. And remember, right, that ser is things like es, son, sois, eres, soy. So es, yo soy, tú eres, él, ella, usted es, nosotros somos, vosotros sois, ellos, ellas, ustedes son. So this is review, right? You remember all of this. Again, right, you would write the verb ser on the front of your note card. Then you would write all of this on the back of your note card. No English, you don't need any English. And just practice the actual conjugation pieces itself until you start to remember it. Okay. So here you might pause, and then you might come back to the video once you've done this and see how you do with the answers. So it would be, yo soy, tú eres, él, ella, usted es, nosotros somos, vosotros sois, ellos, ellas, ustedes son. Okay. So let's look at this activity, right? Let's do a little bit of it together. Here's the activity itself. So you might, in the video, you might, pause the activity and then, come back to it once you have the answer. So here's the front part of the activity. You can pause and try to do it. And here's the back part of the activity. So again, you might want to pause and then come back to it. Let's go through the answers. ¿Tú eres Carlos? No soy Juan. ¿Cómo son ellos? Ellos son altos. ¿Vosotros sois españoles? No, somos ingleses. Ellos son portugueses, pero tú eres brasileño. Ella es profesora, pero ellos no son profesores. Manuel es francés y vosotros sois sus amigas. ¿Quién eres? No, I can't see. Okay. Tengo 18 años, ya soy adulta. Ella es una persona inteligente. Esta coche es muy grande. Hola Mario, ¿de dónde eres? Yo soy argentino. ¿Qué hora es? Son las 5 de la tarde. Mis padres son deportistas. El perro es de la señora con el sombrero. Los zapatos son nuevos, pero el pantalón es viejo. Now, here's some things to look at. Remember, verbs have to match their subject, right? They always have to match. What is the subject here? Vosotros. So sois is matching vosotros, right? What is the subject here? Ellos. So son is going to match ellos. What is the subject? Ella. So this one has to match this one, no? What is the subject? Manuel. So es has to match Manuel, no? And when we change subjects, like here, where the new subject is tú, eres has to match that new subject. Or when we change subject here to ellos, son has to match the new subject. Or here we change the subject to vosotros, so sois has to match that new subject. It's important to remember that those subjects and verbs always have to match. They always have, in Spanish, we call that concordancia, no? But they have to match. Okay, here's another example. Again, you might pause and then come back. So, again, no soy Juan. Son muy simpáticos. Eres chileno. ¿De dónde son? No somos alemanas. Pachu es profesora. Ellas son profesoras. ¿Vosotros de dónde sois? Somos de Barcelona. ¿Eres profesor? Sí, soy profesor. Carlos es taxista. Julio es bombero. So again, the subjects and the verbs are having to match up. Okay, here's another example. Hernando, ¿de dónde eres tú? So again, here is the subject, tú. And so the eres has had to line up with that. Here's the subject, yo. And so soy has to match that. Here's the subject, la ciudad. So es has to match it. Again, la ciudad. So es has to match it. Here's the subject, vosotros. So sois has to match it. Es cierto, all generalized terms use es. De donde usted is the subject, so es has to match it. Yo is the subject, so soy has to match. Nosotros is the subject, so somos has to match. And ellos is the subject, so son has to match. Okay? So that's really important when we're thinking about verbs. The subject and the verb always has to match. Okay. When we did present tense, AR, ER, and IR verbs, what we learned, right, is that there is a verb and the verbs always have what we call an infinitive, which is this AR, ER, or IR. And then it has a stem, which is the root of the verb, right? And we learned that the stem of the verb is going to change the same, or is going to stay the same, excuse me. And that the ending is then going to change to match the subject of who is talking, right? So we learned that these were the endings for present, and each of these endings had to match the subject that it was talking about, but that the root would just stay the same, right? So I could do this for any verb, right? So I have callar, llamar, contestar, escuchar, right? All of these verbs would be the same, right? I take off the AR, I have escuch, and I can do it all the way down the line. Escucho, escuchas, escucha, escuchamos, escucháis, escuchan. Or saludar, right? I take off the AR, saludo, saluda, saluda, saludamos, saludáis, saludan. Or explicar, I take off the AR, explico, explicas, explica, explicamos, explicáis, explican. See? It's always going to be the same. Yeah? That's what we learned. Okay, so here I would recommend pausing the video again, and then we're going to go through the answers. So we have Samantha. So what we're going to do again, we want to take off the AR. And then we would write the root, which is AMA, and then Samantha is ella. So what does that mean? We're going to have ama. Okay? Here, okay, we're going to take off this AR, and we would have escuch, no? That would be the root. And we have yo, so we're going to put the ending that matches yo on the end, which is o, and we would have escucho, no? That's what we're going to do with all of these. We take off the AR, put the root, and then match the ending. So it's cantas, mira, cocinamos, tomas, habláis, bailan, tocamos, termina. Okay? Again, this is just a review because we did this already in Spanish 1. We learned that not only did we have verbs that ended in an AR infinitive, but we also had verbs that ended in an ER and an IR infinitive, right? And then each of these endings had separate sets of present tense endings, right? So verbs that ended in an AR would have one set of endings, verbs that ended in an ER would have another set, and verbs that ended in an IR would have another set. Okay, and so again, we would follow the same pattern. We would have a root, similar to the AR verbs, right? So Just like AR, we would have a root, and then we would have this infinitive that we would take off in order to conjugate the verb. We have this root, and we would take off the infinitive in order to conjugate the verb. We have this root, and then we're going to take off the infinitive to conjugate the verb, right? That's exactly the same. And then we needed to match, right? Always matching the subject with the ending that we're adding to the root, right? Okay. This is a little song that if you guys want to practice listening to present tense verbs is a really good one. I'll put it inside the course content in case you guys want to do that little activity. Okay. So here is a good example of verbs, right? And it has AR verbs, but also this is kind of got only AR verbs. Okay, so here we go. We're going to look at how these will be formed together. So it would be tomo because the person talking is yo. So we're going to take off the AR, put TOM, and then match the ending to the yo form. Okay, and then we still have a yo form here. So again, we're going to take off this AR, put the root, and match the O at the end with the yo form. Okay, here our subject is tú. So we're going to take off the AR, right? TOM, and then match it with the form tú, which is going to be tomas. Then here we have vosotros as the subject. So I'm so sorry, it's very late. We're going to take up this AR. We're going to write down our root, which is llev, and then we're going to match it to the subject, which is vosotros. Here, our subject is Alicia y yo, which is a nosotros. So we're going to take off this AR, right? TOM, and then add the ending, which matches it with the nosotros, which is tomamos. Again, right, we have the same subject, so we're going to take off the AR, and we're still going to match it with the nosotros, right? This one is a tú, because he's asking a question. So we're going to take off the AR and match the ending to a tú form, right? Then here we have mi compañero de cuarto, which is él. We're going to take off this AR and match it with él, which is going to be trabaja. And then here we have a yo, so we have to take off this AR and match it, write the root out, and then match it with the yo form, which is necesito. Nosotros, and then we have hablar here, so we're going to take off the AR, and then we're going to match it with that, so hablamos. And again, it's a nosotros, so it's going to be miramos. And another nosotros, practicamos. Here the subject is ustedes, so we're going to take off the AR, write MIR, and then match it with the ustedes, which is miran. And then finally, we have a vosotros, so we're going to eliminate this AR, and we're going to write MIR, and we're going to match it with the vosotros, which is miráis. Yeah? So again, this says, right? Hola Manu, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo está todo? Muy bien, pero tomo muchos cursos y estudio mucho. ¿Cuántos cursos tomas tú? 6. ¿Y vosotros cuántos cursos lleváis este semestre? Nosotros solamente 2. Alicia y yo tomamos los mismos cursos. Estudiamos fisiología y química. Manu, ¿trabajas en la biblioteca? No, mi compañero de cuarto trabaja allí y yo necesito trabajar este semestre. Sí, entiendo, tu compañero se llama Juan, ¿no? ¿Cómo es él? ¿Es simpático? Sí, es muy simpático. Nosotros hablamos mucho y siempre miramos Baywatch juntos en nuestra casa y después del programa nosotros practicamos inglés. Manu, ¿ustedes miran Baywatch? Este programa es horrible, horrible. ¿Cómo que horrible? ¿Vosotros aquí en los Estados Unidos no miráis Baywatch? Yo, para nada, pues, ¿no? Here's another kind of the same, right? So again, we're going to be doing the same thing. The only difference is we're going to be doing it with either an IR or an ER verb. So again, we're going to take off. So in each of these, the first thing that we would want to do, right, is we're going to take off the infinitive. So we're going to scratch off the infinitive on each of these. Okay. All right. That's good. Then remember that ER is going to be O, es, hemos, es, and in, and IR, so let's write ER there. And IR is going to be O, es, hemos, is, and in. Okay? So here we have an IR verb, and we have mis amigos y yo. So that's a nosotros. So we're going to have hemos, right? So here we go. Here we have another nosotros, and we have an IR. So again, we're going to have hemos. Okay. Here we have an ER verb, and it says estudio. So we know that it must be a yo. So if we have a yo, and we have an ER verb, then we're going to have an O, right? So that's going to be our ending. So now we're going to write aprendo, no? Here we also have a yo. So it's also going to be this O form. So it's going to be creo y asisto, no? Mi novia is going to be an ella. So mi novia is going to be right? So that's going to be the right ending. So it's going to be vive y, then we have a yo form. So we're going to go back to this O. So we're going to do escribo. Y bebo. This is a yo also, even though it wasn't 100% clear. Okay. Here's another one. Let's just kind of go through it a little bit. So my advice would be to pause it here. Try to write the answer, see how well you do, and then go back to it. Estela y su familia viven en Guadalajara. Estela es estudiante y aprende mucho en sus clases de WAG. Ella comprende, lee y escribe 3 lenguas, español, japonés, inglés. Después de la graduación, Estela quiere viajar por el mundo. Tomás no vive con su familia, sus padres, sus 2 hermanas, y su hermano viven en Mérida, la capital de Yucatán. Tomás le escribe a su familia frecuentemente y él recibe muchas cartas de ellos. Tomás y Estela aprenden psicología por la mañana. Él debe estudiar mucho porque es su especialidad. Por la tarde, Tomás y Estela comen en la cafetería de la UAG y después beben café juntos. So again, right, this is the thing that you would want to be practicing. Taking off the infinitive, the IR, the ER, or the AR, and then remembering to match the subject and the appropriate ending, right? That's what we want to do. Now, one of the things that was tricky about last semester that we learned is that there was more than one category of verb, and we learned that there were also irregular yo verbs, right? We learned that there were some verbs that we called go verbs, right, that were irregular, some verbs that fit into no irregular category, and some that kind of functioned in and of themselves. So here are examples of what we would call go verbs, right? Like caigo, hago, pongo, traigo, oigo, salgo. And we remembered that these were called irregular yo because they were only irregular in the yo form, and the rest of the verb followed regular patterns, right? Where all you would do is take off the ER, the AR, the IR, and you would just write the root as is. Okay, let's do a little activity to practice this. So here you might pause it and then come back to it and see how you do, right? So, tú haces, yo oigo, nosotros tenemos, Mariela trae, yo vengo, ellos ponen, vosotros decís, yo tengo, usted hace, y yo salgo. These are all generally categorized as irregular yo verbs, although every book gives a different list of irregular yo verbs, whichever ones they deem are more important for the content that they're teaching. But this is a good example. Okay, Here's another one. Again, I might advise that you just pause it and see how you do and then come back to it. So this is yo estoy. Mario y Elena ponen. Nosotros salimos. Julio da. Teresa y yo hacemos. Tú conoces. Yo sé. Antonio, Jimena y su madre ven. Yo traigo. Remember that the other forms are going to follow regular patterns. Only the yo form that's going to be different. So that's why it's so important to memorize the yo form, right? So again, you would make a list of note cards, right, that were all regular ER and IR verbs, and kind of maybe make 10 to 20 of those so you could memorize the regular form. Then I would write maybe 10 cards for the irregular yo ones, write the infinitive on the front and the conjugation on the back, and try practicing these so that you can memorize them. This is another activity that you might be able to do. Here. So let's put it in order, right? So this would say, todos los días, yo salgo de la casa a las 4 de la mañana. Yo hago ejercicios en el parque. Yo veo a mis amigos allí. Yo traigo discos compactos a la universidad. Yo pongo la música IMO en mi oficina. Now, we learned whenever we were learning irregular yo verbs that there was another set of verbs that were irregular yo, but that had two different meanings. And those were verbs like saber and conocer. You did an entire assignment on them. You remember that saber was always used for facts, information, things that you knew with your, that you had learned, right? Or you knew you had learned. Conocer is for things that you were familiar because you had intimate experience with them. So like you knew someone because you had met them, or you knew a place because you had been there, or you knew a thing because you had studied it, read it, been very familiar with it, tasted a lot of it or whatever. And so that is kind of the difference between saber and conocer, right? Saber is always going to be for things that are factual knowledge, things that you had to learn, like languages or skills or abilities. Conocer is going to be for things that you are familiar with because you have had some experience with them. Okay, so here let's categorize the difference between saber and conocer. Okay, so what is the difference between these saber and conocer? So let's see. These were just, we were meant to write falso o cierto. But here, right, we were going to write either saber o conocer. Conoces a muchas personas because it's about meeting people in person. Sabes conocer al tenis because it's a skill. Sabes cocinar bien, again, a skill that we learned. Conoces a los dueños del apartamento, it's about knowing people. Sabes qué tiendas están cerca, it's about information. And the last thing we learned was that there were verbos oh, this is a little activity. I'll also post this in the content. This is a little song that you could listen to and try to pull out the irregular verbs. So I'll also post that in your course content in case you want to give it a try. The link is just right over here. Okay. The last thing that we learned in this semester is that there were verbs that were irregular in the root. And that these verbs that were irregular in the root fit generally into 3 different categories, but we could do as many as 4, right? There were E to IE, O to UE, and E to I. And the thing that we learned about these verbs was basically that we were adding an extra step, right? So what have we been doing so far? So far, we take the root and we take the infinitive, we take the infinitive off, and we tack on the appropriate ending, right? Those are our steps to conjugate a verb. And we're doing that because we want to express an action with the verb, right? When a verb is in the infinitive, we don't express any action. If a verb is in the infinitive, let's say I put yo hablar or yo amar or yo contar, right? That's something that people do a lot whenever they don't know how to conjugate verbs. It's not saying anything. If you say yo hablar, if you say I to speak, I to say, I to go, I to do, right? We wouldn't say that in English either. We would say I do, I go, right? We're expressing definitive action. By taking the to off of these verbs in English, we are conjugating them. The only difference is that in Spanish, conjugation just works very differently, right? Now, what we learned when we were looking at irregular stem changers is that these verbs had an extra step before we could do that. We had to take a vowel out in the root and replace it with something else, right? That's what we learned. Now, here's some verbs that are often categorized as stem changers, but are not always taught in this category, but because they're irregular yo verbs and they're stem changers, which is kind of an interesting thing. Okay. Stem changers are often seen as being irregular in the boot formation. So that's something else that you can kind of use as a frame of reference. All right. So here, I would pause this and see how you do, and then come back to it. So let's see how we did, right? This says, Carmen y Tomás quieren pasar. So how did we get to quieren? That is a great question. First, we erased this. Then we were left with this root. We know Carmen and Tomás is ellos or third person plural. We know that stem changers are irregular in the third person plural, so that we had to take out this E here and add IE. So we knew the root needed to look like this. And then all we needed to do then was tack on the appropriate ending, which is en, right? Okay, let's do it with cerrar also. Let's do it we'll try to do it with all these verbs. So here we had this AR, right? Okay, so then we had ser, right? And we knew that Tomás is él, or third person singular. So we know that it is a stem changer in that form. So we know we needed to take out that E and add IE. And then all we needed to do then was add on the appropriate ending, which is A, cierra. Okay, let's do it with this one, right? Let's do each one individually. So we have this one, we knew that we had to take off this ER. Then we had the root, right? So we had vol. But we know that Carmen is ella, which is a stem changing form. And so we knew that we had to take out that O and add UE. Okay? And so that led us with vuelva, vuelve. Okay? All right. Again, right? This one is going to be the same. We had vol, but then we had yo here instead of this. So when we had yo, instead of vuelve, we had to have vuelvo. No? Okay. So here we have comienzas. So what did we do? We took off the AR. Okay. Then we had, we would have comens, right? Then we knew that tú is a stem changing form. So we had to change that E to an IE. So we had IE here. Then we had to add on the appropriate ending, which is comienzas. how that ended up in there. Right? Okay, so let's do encontrar, right? So again, we wanted to take off the AR. Okay. Then we have right? And we had a nosotros up. Nosotros doesn't stem change, so it's going to stay the same, right? Encontramos. So, okay, but now we moved to this encontrar. So we're also going to take off the AR here. Okay. So we have up. Tomás is él, which we know is a stem changing form. So now we know that O needs to become a UE. So, and then we need to put the appropriate Tomás ending on it, which is A. Encuentra. Oh. All right. Here, right, this is exactly what we would do for all of these verbs, right? I don't need to go all the way down to the end, but you get the idea, right? This is how we figure out these verbs. Again, make 15, right, stem changing note cards, write out the forms, right? Write out how they stem change on the back, and then look at the infinitive and practice in your mind conjugating them just again and again and again and again until your brain starts to memorize it, until your brain starts to remember it. Okay. All right. This is the final thing that we're going to do. And then we're going to look at what the assignments are this week. So let's just go through it real quick. We're going to assume that you paused it to look at the answers. And then this is what the answers is. So it would say, ¿Qué tipo de casa prefiere usted? Ay, por favor, trátame de tú. Vale. Pues, ¿qué quieres en una casa? Bueno, yo quiero una casa con 3 habitaciones porque tengo un hijo y una hija y todos nosotros queremos nuestro propio dormitorio. La casa que yo tengo ahora solamente tiene 2 dormitorios y es demasiado pequeña. Vale. Yo entiendo tu situación. ¿Preferís vosotros vivir en el centro o fuera de la ciudad? Nosotros no tenemos coche y por eso nosotros pensamos que es mejor vivir en el centro. ¿Y cuándo pensáis vosotros mudaros? Bueno, mis hijos prefieren mudarse cuanto antes y yo también tengo prisa. Vale, yo empiezo a buscar casas para vosotros mañana. Muchísimas gracias, de nada. Okay, so let's look at what it is that you're meant to do together. Okay. So in this week, you are meant to watch this lecture and do the notes, watch the lab video on the alphabet, write an introduction for yourself. Notice that it says in Spanish, right? You can do this introduction video in any way you want. You can do it on TikTok or you can do it however you choose, right? And then you're meant to write a composition about regular verbs, right? And give examples. So how would you do that, right? How would you write that Dropbox? Okay, so let's look at how you would write it together. Here's just an example of what you might write, right? So let's just start and we'll just do one kind of component of this, okay? So here's what you might do. You might start and say, okay, I'm going to pull this out so that way you can look at it really well. So you might write, So then I might write here, when a verb is in the infinitive, it is not expressing an action. When a verb is conjugated in the present tense, it is expressing an action in the present. Then I want to write, I'm just explaining some of the way that verbs work. In order to conjugate a verb, I need to split the root or stem and the ending. Then I need to place on the appropriate present tense ending to match the subject. Okay? And then I'm going to give the forms in which AR is going to, is going to have endings, right? So the present tense endings of AR, right? What are those? And then I'm going to give examples, right? So here are my examples. Yo hablo. And then I'm going to explain. I used hablo because O indicates yo is the subject. Just like that, right? And then I'm going to give examples. Yeah. And then I want to do that not just for regular verbs. I also want to do it for irregular yo verbs, and I also want to do it for stem changing verbs. Okay. And for any of the other things that have been indicated in that module. Okay. So what is your strategy for this week to help you learn your lessons? Remember to make a series of note cards and try to wander around whenever you have free time, just a few minutes, and practice the memorization of the conjugation of verbs. That is going to be the best thing that you are going to do for yourself. Think of it like doing reps with verbs just in your mind, right? And that is the absolute best thing that you can do for yourself. So I hope that you find that helpful. And I will see you in week 3, hopefully, where we will be doing a little bit more Spanish, but this is just a little bit of review. So hopefully it'll be a little bit helpful. Okay, guys, I'll see you in week 3. Don't forget to email me if you have any questions at all. And at the end of this, don't forget to post your notes and any questions that you might have inside the discussion board labeled Apuntes y Preguntas.